3.14 is because pi is 3.14. Okay, so it's round. It's the radius, right? And then the weird thing about this, though, a couple of weird things, is that one, why would you have the barbecue grill in that little thing right out in front, surrounded by flammable fabric? I mean, right there, it just feels wrong. And then to show the laver right inside the fence, it doesn't feel good. It just, the rectangular model feels a lot better. But the interesting thing about this model that he has still works in terms of, could it be used? Well, it feels weird, but maybe. We're so used to the other one. And every piece is accounted for in a much better way than the rectangular. Only if you look at word for word, letter by letter, phrase by phrase of how to build this construction. And him being, like I said, a structural engineer, everything is figured for load and how many guys would it take to set up these big arches. You could do it with a crew of Levites. Cantilevered, suspend, like I said, a flying buttress tied together to the middle. And that thing is, I think, 70 feet high and 100 feet diameter. And it's like, we could make these things as livable dwellings, like a yurt.
But you know yourself, and being in construction, that it's much easier to build something rectangular than it is round. It's much easier.
Well, it's easier, but this is doable, meaning you wouldn't have had to have a crane, and you didn't have to have this, but he had each piece laid out. I mean, it's really interesting what he came up with. And like I said, I can't offhandedly say he's wrong. And even if it was built with a rectangle, this is what I'm saying. The interesting thing is to derive this shape out of those instructions is completely reasonable and engineering-wise really practical. But the question is, wait a second, inside the covered place was simply the menorah, the table to show bread, and altar of incense. A little tiny box would suffice. Why in the world do you need a giant dome? And if you have a giant dome, it put the Ark of the Covenant dead center underneath what looks like a skylight portal straight up. So this is almost like an eyeball shape looking straight up at the Almighty. Okay, well, that's interesting. And not that we have to go there, but the other interesting thing, this is a model of the flat earth with a dome canopy. Oh, man, to play into that concept, which is another interesting regard. I'm not saying that's what it is, but it certainly is the same exact model. But why do they need all that space in there? I mean, where do you go with the sacrifice?
The problem with what we have is when we discuss something like that and you put it on the screen, will they automatically think that that's what we believe? So unless you specifically say that this is something that someone else has done, not necessarily that we agree or disagree with it, I think you have to have that caveat in there, because we have to be careful, because what we put on there, people will assume we believe. And I can't say that I agree, because there's, not that it's not possible, but it doesn't seem, like I say, you just need a small place for the actual temple itself, and then something around it for the court of it just doesn't seem right. Now, I'm not saying it isn't, because I don't know. And I have done the study, and I don't like listening to some other people unless I investigate it myself. That's why I like your teaching, because you give it and I can go investigate for myself. But I have not investigated this at all. So,
well, that's why I'm bringing it up. So yeah. The reason I'm bringing it up is because all we have ever heard is the rectangle model, but every one of the rectangle models are different. That's what Andrew found. Okay, so you're recording now, Kurt. The idea.
Well, I just want to kind of even talk to Mark's point, is that I don't think even, and what's his name? Sean can't join us today because he's already getting the Passover ready at his house too. So, sure. But like we don't all agree on everything. Well, even something like the flat Earth, people will talk about that every single day, and to me that's just boring. Who cares what the shape of the Earth is, really? I mean, I'm on it, so how does it affect me? How does it affect me knowing it's a dome? or cabal. It doesn't. So it just
all the flat Earth does, for those that believe it, is it separates people and causes arguments. I have a guy that comes to our group. He's a young fellow, and he believes in a flat Earth. I just said, that's fantastic. I don't want to argue with you. I just, in my house, in my teaching group, you're not allowed to bring it up. Outside the group, you can tell it to the whole world what you believe. But in our group, don't bring it up. It creates division. I don't want division, right? Okay, so you believe that, that's fine. You can try and explain it to me as many times as you can. It doesn't make any sense to me in any way, shape, or form.
Here's the value of doing this thing with Eric that we're doing, the whole Ericology thing, for lack of a better word. That's just poor English. But to me, it's like it's like this hidden treasure, you know. And you remember, you know what? I keep talking about a combination lock, but I'm thinking more along the line of a cylinder lock. Like, it's an ancient thing that used to be used, right? It was like almost like a treasure chest, but not really. Like, you would put valuable jewelry and you'd have the combination spun around. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
you know? And it seems like as I'm watching and editing last week's video, there's treasure here, you know, and it's waiting to be discovered. But it's like there's a clue all the way through this, you know. And this is the interesting thing, like the Mishkan pattern. Like, if we can learn to recognize as we're reading the scripture and lining it up with each letter, the Mishkan pattern as Eric sees it, then eventually we'll get to the point where we're just reading it and understanding it, and then maybe even turning that combination lock ourselves to open up the treasure ourselves. Because let's face it, Eric may not be here for us to have access to. The internet may not be here for us to have access to. We may not be able to have these conversations forever, you know, but maybe there's something hidden in that Hebrew that we could use and learn how to use down the road that'll benefit us even more, you know. So
well, so with that in mind, that's the benefit, in spite of that round Mishkan is a model of the accurate depiction of the flat earth with a dome firmament, a rakia. Whether or not that's true, there's a value in the model. So you can see something in the typical rectangular Mishkan model, but you can see something else in this model. And regardless of whether or not that's a model of the earth, there's still something in the model. So I could say, well, if I believe that the Mishkan was rectangular, I'm not saying that I think the earth and the universe is rectangular. It has nothing to do with the shape of the universe or the earth. So too, I could say that there's a value in this model that has nothing to do with the shape of the earth, even though it looks exactly like the people believe the earth looks like, hanging in outer space. If there is no outer space, it's just a tent and a flat earth. It's like, it doesn't matter. It's just that happens to be a similar format. Now,
so let's just take that whole 3.14 thing, right? There's a video going around that went around a couple of weeks ago from 2009 where Bill Gates is walking into this governmental building, and somebody comes out of nowhere and they slap him in the face with a pie, right? But unless you know the Illuminati or the Masons symbol, they think that 3.14 is part of that Pythagorean math that's very, very important. So if they think that, it has to come from somewhere. So, you know, as you're saying, pi means something, then maybe pi means something more than we think it does, you know. And I think like literally everything's on the table now after what we thought we knew but really didn't know, and now we're learning. Like what
people can do, they can take whatever Yahweh has done, made, or whatever, and turn it for evil, to use it for their purposes and put whatever meaning they want to it. So if you're concerned about doing things, I can't do this because they're doing it, then there's lots of things that would be forbidden for us. But Yahweh has not forbidden for us. As far as this round thing, to me, like you say, it has some value, for example, because everything is done in cycles in scriptures. So that shows a cycle. So there's some value to it, but there's so many things that I see, at least at first glance, that I see is wrong. That doesn't appear right. I shouldn't say it's wrong. It doesn't appear right based on what I understand. And I can't say it's wrong without really studying it to the level that this guy did. So I don't want to poo-poo it and say, hey, no, it's not real. But at the same time, it doesn't sit right with me the way I see it here. Now, if I saw it in it, like I say, in a different way, maybe it would be more appealing. But right now, this is not appealing to me at all.
We can go on just for the sake of clarity. We'll go ahead and talk about the rectangular model, just because that's the motif that I always draw out. But I wanted to bring up that Andrew Hoy, H-O-Y, is a very intellectually accurate structural engineer, and he has accounted for literally every weight of metal that was used in the sockets and the connectors, and every length of every piece of wood, every size that was given in the description of the tabernacle. Now, just for what it's worth, the Mishkan pattern that I talk about, that we'll be discussing here in a moment, takes no regard of those matters. I don't even look at the pieces of wood, the number, the count, the attachment, how the hinges are, how that, nothing to do with that. That's not what I'm looking at. All I'm looking at is the fact that there's a fence, okay? And then inside the fence, there's a barbecue grill. And then there's a tent, a covered structure, and halfway between the barbecue grill and the tent, there's a laver. Well, that doesn't look like halfway, but it's not about that. I'm not going to criticize what Andrew has drawn, but what I'm saying is the only thing I'm looking at in the Mishkan pattern is the fact that there's a fence, a barbecue grill, and a laver, and then a tent. And inside the tent, there's some other objects. That's all. That's it. That's all there is to the pattern. Now, what he has done, looking at the Mishkan in detail, is a whole nother study that I was bringing up because, not to get into Pythagoras, but Pythagoras, for those who don't know, was the guy who, you might say, authored the Pythagorean theorem. And in geometry, it's the way to calculate a right angle. So you have a squared being first leg, or A is first leg, B is the second leg, and C would be the hypotenuse of a right angle. So you take this measurement and you square it, like if it's 4 squared is 16, you take this leg, if it's 3, it's called a 3, 4, 5 right triangle. So if this leg is 3 and this is 4, this one has to be 5. 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16. Yeah, those together, that's 25, and the square root of 25 is 5. So you got to, when you do carpentry, you use this all the time. In Pythagoras, the guy about a Greek man about 500 BC, approximate contemporary with Daniel, who, remember, had been a Hebrew guy taken in captivity by Babylon, now living in Media, Persia, because Persia took over Babylon. Around the same era that Daniel would have changed the writing from the Paleo to the modern flame, as I purport, as I believe, about that same time, the Greeks took off with a culture that was unprecedented. It had never happened before. The ancient Greeks, actually, according to Joseph Dumont's study, the Greek city-states, Athens and Troy and Sparta, were actually from Hebrew Israelites that had lost their identity, were in dispersion. So Joseph Dumont's book, called 2300 Days of Hell, is about, I think it's an 800-page book. But
I read it.
But the first 500 pages are the history showing how the Israelites that had been in Egypt before the Exodus actually went north, founded the Greek city-states, including Troy. And when they first started out and were doing righteousness, they prospered. But then corruption, evil took over. The place went nuts, disintegrated, and then turned into war or revolution, like the Trojan War, for example. And then they took off and they went to Spain, Iberian Peninsula, where you get the word Hebrew, is the same as Iber. And then they went up to Ireland, and then from Ireland into Scotland. And so this book shows the lineage, the tracing names. And then Jeremiah ended up taking, Zedekiah, his two daughters with him up into Ireland and married the head guy there, and also in Scotland. And so you have this connection between Scotland, Ireland, Greece, and the Hebrew Israelites. And it's like, well, maybe that's true. The thing is, Joe did an incredible study in writing that whole thing up, and where his conclusion of the book, 2,300 Days of Hell, goes into the tribulation and stuff that Daniel wrote about. And I'm not necessarily agreeing or disagreeing, like with the shape of the Mishkan, but what I'm saying is that when you look at world history, it's all tied together. And some people obsess over that and become, like you say, Mark, the word fantastic can mean it's all fantasy. It's all make-believe. It's a phantom. We get all those same English words out of that, which is actually Hebrew consonants. Doesn't mean it's not true. Doesn't mean it is true. But it's like, where do we take it? So to me, you pull back to where's the only reality. Everything else is imagination, interpretation. Was Paul saying this? Is this really the shape of the Mishkan? And it's in the letters. And so what's in the pattern is the reckoning or the bearing for each letter. In that, so you have the square or the rectangular pattern behind you. Well, Pythagoras came up with these, what's known as 5 solids. That gets into geometry, which gets into the letter phi, and it's a Greek letter spelled P-H-I, which looks kind of like the letter kuf, which also has something to do with the shape of the letter bet. That's part of the study that I write about, but it's not part of what we're going to talk about. But just so people know, I'm not opposed to Pythagoras, even though his school of mathematics was considered almost like what we would call occult or Kabbalist, or like the Masonic construction. And from what I hear, if any one of Pythagoras's students told anybody the mathematical secrets, he could be put to death. But it was right around the time of Daniel that the Greeks took the Paleo-Hebrew writing and flipped it, and it was actually the exact shape of the ancient Greek letters, only they flipped it reading left to right instead of the ancient Paleo-Hebrew reading right to left. It opened up, you might say, the use of a different side of your brain, right brain, left brain concept. So by doing that, they brought in a type of thinking, you might say, that was abstract or linear, compared, more mathematical, compared to the Hebrew way of thinking that, Mark, as you were saying, was more spiral or circular. And you can find those patterns in the writing style and in graphic, even in the words themselves, like Lila, Lamed, Yod, Lamed, Hey, Lila, well, Delilah, and also a spiral staircase. And the letter Lamed is this turning thing. So right in that word, there's this spirally turning, which happens to be, as they say, you might put this graphic up, Kurt, the shape of the Earth's orbit around the sun is not a circle. So we grew up in school having what they call heliocentric. So here's the sun drawn, whether it was a 3D drawing on a 2D flat piece of paper, and then the planets orbit around it. And they say, okay, that's the way it works. But it's like, wait a minute. If the sun is moving through space on a trajectory, then the Earth and the planets are going around it in this spiral tail. And so when I first saw this, somebody put it up, somebody from Australia, I think, put it up as a video. And it's like, it was astounding. It's like, what the heck? Is the sun stationary in the universe? Well, the one concept is that they had in the Middle Ages is that the Earth was the center of the universe. Here's the Earth, and the sun went around the Earth. And because the Earth is where man is put there, Yahweh's attention is there. But then wait a minute, no, we're in the middle, not the middle, we're at the edge of the Milky Way, which itself is in the middle of the whole universe. And what the heck, our sun is moving, the Earth is moving around it. So as it's moving, that's actually a spiraling, and it's flying around the universe. It's like, we're not the middle of anything. And it's like, to wrap your mind around where are we and what's going on, we don't know. And the more you think about it, the more bewildering it becomes. So for me to say, the center, the pupil of Yahuwah's eye, as it were, it's called the little man of the eye. We who choose to regard his words are the focus of his attention.
Yes, absolutely.
Now I could say, no, wait a minute, no, that's not true. As a Christian, it's those who have their focus on Jesus are the focus of his attention. It's like, but that's not what he said.
No.
What he said repeatedly, Ayin Vav Dalet, and constantly, perpetually, is that those who pay attention to his, Yahuwah's voice, are the focus of his attention for the good, for protection, for favor. And so we appeal not only for you, Mark, but for other people that are regarding Pesach, some last night, some tonight. Yahweh, protect your people, those people, your people who are paying attention to your voice and regarding Pesach today. Please protect them against the powerful government or the not so nice neighbors who might rat them out and call them. Please, Yahweh, protect your people who are trying to regard your words. Give us favor here and now.
Amen to that.
So the interesting thing is, I think that Yahweh used, we mentioned this before, that he used Greek. In English, K-E-Y, key, you put it in a door, excuse me, you either lock or unlock. But in Hebrew, the word key is mem, pei, tav, chet. So pei, tav, chet is something which can open, but chet is a fence. So it's something which is fenced, but openable, pei, tav, chet. Pei, tav, they say, look in the dictionary and look in translations, it's the part of the forehead. Why would pei tav be the part of the forehead? Pei is a mouth, and tav is a sign of the covenant or a mark or a target. And so this is part of the study. It's like you look at pei tav, it's also a morsel, a piece of bread. Why would pei tav be a piece of bread or a corner of the forehead? This is how the analysis of the language works. You look at pei tav chet, and it says that which is openable, something that opens. But it's protected. There's a fence. It's blocked. Remember the letter het, like the big white fence in the pattern around behind you there, Kurt. If it's a fence, it can be a garden. It can be a pasture. It can be a castle, excuse me, surrounded by a moat. It can be a castle surrounded by a moat. You can take that noise out there. If het is something protected, like with a fence, it doesn't even have to be a real fence. It could be a moat. It could be a pasture land surrounded by rocks, or it could just be a well-watered area that you put your attention to. So what's pei, tav, chet? Well, if a pei is something that opens, tav is something like a target, or if we say that tav is a sign of the covenant, what makes us say that? Well, because you have aleph and tav. If aleph says, I will, and tav says, here, I've accomplished it, now we're assigning a meaning to the letters which are not necessarily what anybody says the letter means. So if aleph is an ox, what's an ox going to accomplish? What has that got to do with the letter tav? What's that got to do with the sign of the covenant? So in talking about this concept,
just like even like you're always say like look at the pictures and even in the Paleo Hebrew, but when I look at this in particular and I see all these tribes around the outside of it, that white fence says to me, stay out. Like keep out. Like you gotta wait. There's like a waiting period going on around here. This isn't like everybody's allowed in right now.
Everybody was not allowed into the Mishkan. So that's the interesting thing. See, there's two types of fences there in that Mishkan pattern. There's the big white fence going around, but then also the covered place is an enclosure, which is a keep out.
Right. So this. Yeah, go ahead. Then I'll just finish.
Okay, let me finish what I'm saying about the Greek and the English and the Hebrew. So in English, the word key, K-E-Y, literally just is, it allows you access to something which is either fenced or not fenced. Well, if you look at Petov Hey, and the interesting thing is that in English, the hey is the fifth letter where we get the letter E. In fact, in Hebrew, Paleo-Hebrew, you've got a vertical with 3 horizontals. Well, you turn it that way, it's epsilon in ancient Greek, or the letter E, it's the fifth letter, pronounced ha, which in English is the letter H. But the letter chet is the 8th letter that in English is pronounced like an H. This is where all the confusion starts to happen. The word hua, het vav he, is Eve's name, E-V-E. But in Europe, call her Eva, E-V-A. Why? Well, because the hua in Hebrew is the 8th letter, chet vav he. So the second hey, hua, is the letter E, but it's pronounced as an A, which is an A. The first letter, chet, is the 8th letter, chet, but nobody likes that sound. So they make it, because it's the 8th letter, which is in English the letter H, they just change it to hey, but that sounds like the hey of the 5th letter, so that's how hua became E-V-E. Eve, or Eva, E-V-A. So what I'm telling you is this placement of the letter, where in the sequence it comes, the pronunciation of the letter, whether somebody likes the sound of it or not, and how it relates to this Mishkan pattern, that's where all the confusion comes from. And in Hebrew, Petov Chet is something that opens. Mem Petov Chet. Mem is a prefix. It means the place or the object or the one who, or it turns a non-substantive noun like the word knowledge. That's not a substance, but it's noun. And if you would put the word mem in front of the word for know, like the word to know or knowledge is dalet ayin. So if you put a mem in front of dalet ayin, it makes it knowledge being this thing, like the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's not just, oh yeah, I know about that, but it becomes an object of this thing, which is a non-substance noun. So to make it mem petov het, it's the thing that opens, the thing that opens. In other words, it's the tool, the device which opens the thing which is openable. But the interesting thing, if you look at petov hey is a fool, a simpleton, to be seduced or enticed. It's like, so the petov hey means to be on display. It's the feminine suffix. So you take the petov, the mouth of the covenant, and put it open on display where it's not protected. That's the enticement, seduction of a prostitute, a harlot. And the fool and the simpleton that goes, and goes for that, you read the book of Proverbs, and he's going to lose his life. But when the petov is chet, instead of hey, even though there's this comparison between chet and hey, like the word Eva, Eve, it's now this protected thing that's sacred. Well, what's petov? The mouth that opens according to the terms of the covenant. You look in the Red Dictionary, it's actually the female anatomy. It's like, what? But why do they call it a piece of bread? Why do they call it part of the forehead? Because it's the wide open part. And it's like, oh gosh, that's the way the language works. You have to be able to sit here and analyze every letter and every word with other words that are spelled similarly. And in Hebrew, the word for key literally means that which opens. And what my wife had noticed when we were looking at this, 15 years ago, that in Greek, the word key, K-E-Y, means that which locks up, closes it. You get thrown in jail and you lock it with a key. I can't get out of here. Yahweh used the Greek language to lock this stuff up. Ever since the days of Pythagoras, which is the same era as Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato. So you get Plato, getting into philosophy and religion and all these Greek and Roman gods. The Greek gods became the Roman gods, and it has sustained all this time. And to all of a sudden say, yeah, but it's the Hebrew, it's the ancient Paleo-Hebrew, which is the key, based on pei, that's a mouth, and tav is a sign of the covenant, which has something to do with marriage, a type of relationship between Yahuwah and Israel. And what he said by covenant, the tav, the sign of the covenant, when he said, I'm going to do this, that's aleph, and the accomplishment of it is the tav. So when you make a marriage vow, you're locked into this relationship. And Yeshua said, you better never make a vow rather than make it and break it. That's like, oh gosh, what does that mean? What happens if you're somehow forced into a situation? It's like, that's a whole nother matter. But what I'm saying is this is really serious stuff. And you have to be able to say, what's the difference between het and hey? And if it doesn't matter, then this study isn't for you. It matters a lot. Now, I could say on one hand, it doesn't matter whether the model of the Mishkan is round or rectangular, but 3.14 being the meaning of the letter pi, just like essentially 5/3 is the meaning of the letter phi. Both those Greek numbers hold all kinds of understanding about the physical structure of the universe. The Fibonacci sequence is related to phi, which is that pattern of 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 11, 13, 21. And it's like it sets up this whole thing, which is the spiral in a sunflower and a shell and the ear, a spiral galaxy, and it's micro to macro and DNA helix and on and on and on. It's like Yahuwah used these things, and the Greeks figured out how to organize it in a way that we can understand it with our left brain. And there's something about the right brain Hebrew. So here's the interesting thing. What I'm getting at is to say, back in the olden days, before 500 BC, if Hebrew was the original language before creation, and after the Tower of Babel, Hebrew was sustained, but all the other languages spun out, Lashon, Shin Vav Nun, which is different and variant, the word for tongue. Shafah, Shin Pei Hey, is referred to as the Hebrew language, which means to restore to health and cure from lunacy. So at the Tower of Babel, where we get, babbling like a baby, blah, 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 saying the babbling brook, Yahweh used languages to morph, to permutate, to go into all kinds of variations after the Tower of Babel, used Greek in particular to lock it up, but to organize things in an incredible way. But now to go back to Hebrew, after running the Greek gamut, is to pull into it all the benefits of the last 2,500 years of the Greek advantage, and going back to the Hebrew that the Greek had turned its back on in a way that David never had access to. We stand now looking to incorporate the benefits of the Paleo coming out of 2,500 years of Greek, pulling back into the Hebrew before that. Why, it's kind of like in a picture, an Oreo cookie. You got the ancient Hebrew, then you got the Greek whipped pig fat with sugar in it, and the white filling, and then another, tasty or chocolate cookie on top of it. It's like, this has never been accessed before. We're not going back to the Paleo is to be like-minded with them, but we're taking the advantage of all this stuff as if Yahweh did us a favor bringing us to this point. I'm not trying to bash the Greek mind, the Roman mind, the Latin, the English. There's a huge benefit with the Christian understanding that if the Jews don't have a regard for Jesus or anything that happened with the last 2,000 years, it's to their disadvantage to not see it. Yesterday, I spent a couple hours looking at Genesis 1:1, and I tell you, I saw something in there, should be its own talk. I could address it a little bit if you want, but the first word Bereshit, I'll just give you this much. The first word Bereshit, Bet Resh Aleph Shin Yod Tav, okay, means in the beginning. Okay, In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, so what? Well, bet is this thing that opens up and unfurls. In the Hebrew, it's drawn as a great letter. The first letter is really big. Okay. Well, Resh is an exalted man. Okay. Regardless of who the exalted man, it's kind of like a Messiah figure concept. Okay. Bet is a house. Okay. So the house opens up and the exalted man steps out. What house? Whose house? The Father's house, perhaps. So you could see a picture. The Father's house is this exalted man stepping out of the Father's house. It's not the Father. It must be his son. Bet Resh happens to mean the word son, S-O-N. Okay. Bet Resh Aleph. Well, Resh Aleph, hey, means to perceive or to put on exhibition or to allow to see, to allow to comprehend. So somehow the son steps out of the Father's house to put on exhibition what? Resh Aleph, Bet Resh Aleph. If you look at the first three letters, it literally means, it comes from the word Bet Resh Resh, Bet Resh Aleph, the Aleph suffix. Purify, select, set apart, separate, examined, investigated, evidence, chose, tested, proved, cleaned, clarified, sharpened. It's the possibility of choice. It's fruit, cult of inferior qualities, distinct, evident, certain, fastidious. In other words, what came out of the house is that the Creator designed everything to be examinable. And if something is cleaned, then that means it has the possibility of not cleaned. And he set up all through the Torah that we should, that he is kadosh, therefore we should be kadosh. And we should not eat certain things because that's het lamed lamed, profane, vile, common, and it will abominate us. And he says, if you want to be part of my kingdom, you got to be like me. And the first thing that he did in the first three letters is that he opened up the possibility that things are either good or not good, either sacred or profane. Aleph Sheen is the word fire. Resh Aleph Sheen is the word head, but it's also top, summit. So it's the pinnacle, but it's also basis and foundation. It's also the word for venom, which is something toxic. It also means first place, primacy, choice, best part, primitive, and is the picture of a tadpole. I mean, it means tadpole, which has a big head, but then also this vertebrae, this tail sticking out, which is the exact shape of the letter bet. A tadpole technically is the same shape as the letter bet. A head without growing backbone, which is why I draw the letter bet in the particular shape it is. Aleph, so this is Bet Resh Aleph Shin Yod Tav. So here, out of the big palace, the house, the Father's house, steps this exalted one it's a Messiah figure. Foundation, basis, first place, primacy, choice, best part, that's the Father's chosen son. And his head is on fire. Aleph Shin is fire, his head on fire. If you have your head on fire, either you're like Richard Pryor and you're smoking crank and made a mistake and running down the street, and people made cartoons about that, or it means you've got a great idea. His head's on fire. He's got a great idea. What's a great idea? It's what's mapped out in this Aleph Bet. But Shin Yod Tav means thorn bush, early fig, garment, put, placed, or became, established and constituted. So it's where we get to set something down. I'm going to sit. So an English word, sit and set, you get down on your rear end and place something, to set something in concrete. Okay, well, his head is on fire. The word Rosh also means basis and foundation, okay, but it means thorn bush. So here, his head is associated with a thorn bush. That's a crown of thorns. Why would the Messiah figure coming out of the Father's house have a big idea, have his head a garment of thorns? What's that got to do with the early fig? Well, that brings me right to remembering Yeshua gave a parable about the early fig. A couple of them, a couple different parables. It says when you see the end, the fig tree end starting to become tender, you know that the season is right there at the door. And he went to the tree and it didn't have any figs and he cursed it and it was completely withered. There was a couple other things. But what I'm saying is that he used pictures of early figs in his parables. A garment and a thorn bush is Shin Yod Tav, and that's on the head of the Messiah figure coming out of the Father's house. So for Yeshua to say, I've got this big idea, and part of it's going to include that Pilate and Herod are going to conspire to take a crown of thorns. Some Roman guard is going to make a crown of thorns and stick him on his head and beat it on with a stick, sinking it down into his skull. Why the heck would you do that? If you were the guy that could make up all the plans and make the make up a story of how do people have their sins forgiven? Oh, I know. I'm gonna have a guy smash a big long thorns into my skull. Why didn't you say? Tell you what, if you can juggle 3 bowling balls standing on a round globe, everybody gets to have their sins forgiven. Woohoo! Juggle 3 bowling pins standing on a bowling ball. No, I'm going to be crucified, punched holes in with a crown of thorns on my head. That'll do it. Who came up with this idea? But that's the plan that's written in the alphabet that's locked into that Mishkan pattern right there behind you. And he made this whole thing, that when he repeats the word, Bet Resh Aleph is the second word in Genesis 1:1. Again, the word Abra as in Abraham, and the word Brit as in the word covenant, and the word Barut, Bet Resh Vav Tav, which means food or nourishment. Bet Resh Hey means to recover. Bet Resh Yod Vav Tav is health. Bet Resh Kaf means bless. Bet Resh Kaf Hey means a pond or a pool, like where the tadpole is. So as you sit there and look at all these things, you get these pictures. He made everything with the possibility of choosing the sacred separated from the profane. And that's in the first 2 words. So for us to be about this business of saying, let's look at this pattern, let's look at this language, let's look at what he said, let's look at Yeshua, not the way that he's been turned into a profane deity, but the way he came stepping out of the Father's house as the pure Son, only saying what the Father said and only doing what he saw the Father do. If we choose to examine and investigate the evidence and looking for the pure, the select, the distinct and evident, this is his business. It's the first 2 words of Genesis 1:1. And he built the universe to be able to have us do this. And then the word Elohim, the third word, Aleph Lamed Hey, means these. It means curse, wail, and lament, or it's also the object of reference. It means to take something on oath. It's the word for deity or goddess. And you realize it's like he set everything up as a covenant, that if you take an oath and you fulfill the oath, because you take it religiously as an object of reverence, you get the blessing. And if you break the oath, you turn your back on what Yahweh said, these are the important matters, you get cursed. And he ultimately said, on Judgment Day, there's going to be weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth. A lot of people who don't know, don't care, too inconvenient. Okay. There's going to be weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth. You better, as they say, hope to God you're not in that camp of the 5 foolish bridesmaids or the goats or the tares that get separated out. But it looks to me, the very next word, the 4th word, is Aleph Tav. He put within the Aleph Tav the matters to investigate. The next word, Hashemayim, well, that's just the heaven. But the word Shem, Hashem, literally means put, place, reassignment, assessing. That's the same word as Eric. It's the same word as Shin Vav Mem. It means made to understand, directed toward sense. It's sensible. Value, estimate, evaluate, to name something. It's the word for garlic. And it's either to be stamped and marked and branded, like the shape of the letter Tav, the X, right here, boom, boom, X marks the spot, skull and crossbones, or Shin Vav Mem Mem means empty place, desolate, lonely, desert. Either we're going to be with him forever in eternity, or we're not. We're going to be fires of the pit of hell, lonely, desolate, or vaporized, however you want to believe that. But the point is, right here in Genesis 1:1, behold this, Hey Aleph, but this is, and Aleph Tav, the eretz, the earth. Hey Aleph Resh Zadi, but Resh Zadi means run and a course. Aleph means I am or I will. So I'm going to run this course. Resh Zadi Vav Nun, Ratzon means favor, voluntary, or agree. Resh Zadi Vav Yod, pleasing, acceptable. So Yeshua steps out of the Father's house and says, I volunteer to run this race, even though it's going to be a crown of thorns. I'm going to run the gamut of Aleph to Tav, these 22 letters as if they were the obstacle course. And Resh Zadi Ayin means pierced or whipped. Resh Zadi Mem, pressed and flattened. That looks like matzah bread. It has something to do with the Resh Zadi. Resh Zadi Hey means to count, enumerate, or pay off, which is just like the Mem Nun. Told, narrated, discoursed, gave a lecture. Resh Zadi Het, murdered, assassinated, capital punishment. The idea that these 22 letters are the story that the Messiah stepped out of the Father's house with this big idea, his head on fire, including a crown of thorns, including to be crucified, so that he could fulfill the sequence of the 22 letters as if they were the map, the course to run, the Resh Zadi. And though it would include being whipped, pierced, flattened, pressed like the matzah cracker of tonight's Passover meal, he volunteered to do it, pleasing, acceptable, to fulfill the wishes of his Father. And if you don't see that in these 22 letters, which are mapped to the Moedim of Leviticus 23, then you won't see the reality of what this is. Anyway, back to you guys for a bit here before we get into the Mishkan pattern itself.
It's always a pleasure. And how much you got out of the word Bereshit is really phenomenal. And I'm going to look at it myself and take a look.
Okay, well, is there anything else you wanted to add to the Mishkan study, or should we just get into it? Or
just get into it as far as I'm concerned. What about you, Kurt?
Yeah, I mean, I gotta press stop and then record again because we're at 49 minutes. So, I feel like what we just talked about can be its own standalone bonus feature, and then we'll do the Mishkan separate.
Sure, that's a good idea.
We should do that, but let me then add one more word into this.
I just want to add something else then, because I was talking about how this looks like a fence and stay out. And then I see Israel completely around it, and if this is Het, but then Het becomes open now, and we're allowed to come in. But this is weeping and gnashing of teeth out here. This becomes the future of what would become our brothers and sisters. Like, we've been horrible to each other, but now it seems like we're allowed in now. We were locked out, now we're allowed in. And that's the way I'm seeing it now. So, anyway.
Okay,
we'll let you go, Mark. Your mic is off. Okay, shalom. Okay, anyway, Kurt, so the other interesting thing about this is that the word shemen, Shin Mem Nun, is oil. And it's number 8. And it's a synonym of Ayin Resh Kaf, Eric, as in Erictology, which means to assess, appraise, evaluate. And when the word for the heavens, so when he says Aleph Tav Hashemayim in Genesis 1:1, Hashem, Yod Mem is plural. So the word heaven is actually the plural of Shem, which means name or place. The book of Exodus, written in Hebrew, is called Shemot, Well, Shem is the root word, and Vav Tav is the feminine suffix. Yod Mem is the masculine suffix, which is both plural. So whether it's Shemayim or Shemot, it's the plural of Shem. So you could say Shemot literally means names. Shemayim literally means places or names, but one's feminine suffix and the other one's masculine suffix, but they're both plural. So to name something and to place something literally is Shem. So the stars are both named and placed. So the fact in English we say it's the heavens. Well, what do you mean by heaven? Do you mean the night sky? Do you mean the day sky? Do you mean the universe that's deeper than what we think of as sky? If we have a sky like that dome over the round Mishkan concept, the dome of a tent, the roof of a house, it means to name and place, to put something there on purpose, exactly where it is, by name, by place, by essence. So this word Hashem literally means made to understand, directed toward sense. In other words, those stars are not just little dots, but yet there's that famous song. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Baba, black sheep, have you any wool? Yes, sir, 3 bags full. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. It's all the same tune. You ever notice that? Twinkling stars with names and places. Turn it into a thing about the sheep having wool. It's the same as the alphabet song, or the alphabet in English. You ever think of the alphabet song like stars? What are those? Some people have never thought, hey, what are these letters? They just take it for granted. Some people, met a lady one time who said as a little girl, she thought that A was somehow a portal, something that opened, a Petav Chet. A is some kind of door that you open up and go into the world of A. B, another type of door that opens up and you go into the world of B. It's exactly what it is. Every letter is a chet of some world that you can only see if you look through the lens, the glasses of that letter. That concept is what's on the top of the Erectology chart, where you've got the 22 letters across, the 22 letters down, and you've got the different stripes. That concept that every letter is a type of lens by which you can see every other letter. Every letter is a type of lens or a dimension or like a microscope compared to a telescope, compared to infrared glasses, compared to X-ray glasses like Superman had. Every letter is a way to see everything else that Elohim built in the universe beyond time and space. Time and space is just two different types of dimensions. So we have what we call geometry is 3 dimensions. 1 dimension is it just exists or it doesn't. That's kind of 1-dimensional. 2-dimensional, it exists on as a line or a plane. 3-dimensional, all of a sudden that line or plane gets what we call the z-axis. The x and y-axis is like a 2-dimensional, then you get z-axis is spatial volume. So then you get Pythagoras kind of laid all this stuff out. So the model of that Mishkan, we look at it and go, oh, it's a 2-dimensional flat image, but we see it as 3-dimensional. Okay, so that's if something is 3-dimensional, it exists, that's 1. 2, it could be drawn out on a map, that's 2-dimension, but 3 dimensions, oh, it has space, it has volume. Well, what's 4th? What's the 4th dimension? It gets into this whole other realm. We might say, well, is time the 4th dimension? Well, then what's the 5th dimension? There was a singing group, but we think of as the 5th dimension, like getting into whether something is a cult, into the world of demons and angels. What's the 6th dimension then? Yahweh's words? What's beyond the sixth dimension? Well, guess what? We can stop right here and say, we're setting up a map. We're setting up some kind of a pattern. What if I can back that up to the days of creation and look at those 7 days as if they were 7 dimensions? What happened the first day? He said there was darkness. There was a status quo of void, the deep, tehom. Tav he vav he means abyss or deep or you could say unstructured. It's kind of like before he said yehi or, before he said let there be light, was there water? Was hydrogen connected to oxygen and forming a molecule of water? Or maybe not. In fact, maybe there wasn't even any electrons and protons. What does it even mean? If we look in the first verse, second verse of Genesis and back all the way up, it's almost like he's describing before there was molecular structure, but he put together the idea and the plan, and it was somehow fit to these alphabet letters. When he said yehi or, it was maybe not only let there be light, but there was a way to make the concept of existence come into existence. That's one-dimensional. When you separate water from water with something in between them, that's a model of the word ehie, which was his name translated I am or I will be. It's two things separated by something else. Well, that's two dots separated by a line. Whether the line goes this way, that looks like in mathematics divide. Two dots separated by another line. Two dots connected by a line is kind of like the geometric model of the word ehie. That's model day 2, separating water from water. Day 3, he separated water from earth, and then he spoke plant life in. Plant life, where do you get the concept of life? That's a whole nother type of dimension. You have existence, and then you have spatial geometry, and then suddenly you bring in this concept of life. Well, life operates within a space. So he created existence, and then a space, and then life to live inside the space. Well, then what's life do? Well, life is now regulated by time. Well, that's like a whole nother dimension, a way to organize and catalog and make time we think of like with a Greek linear thought from past, present, future. So now you're structuring the way the brain is the mind is going to work, human consciousness, past, present, future. What about angels and demons? That's a whole other dimension. And what I'm doing by going through this is mapping each of the 7 days of creation to each of the pieces of the Mishkan. That's what's happening in my mind. And each of the Moedim, which we're going to get into as we describe the Mishkan pattern. But what I'm saying is that the goal or the prize in front of you ends up on the Sabbath day, being number 7. When you lose the Sabbath day, when you don't take that into consideration, which parallels with the resurrection of Yeshua out of the grave, if you don't believe in the Sabbath day, and if you don't believe in the resurrection of Yeshua, you're not going to get this pattern. But what I'm saying is that the structure of the universe, the physics, the geometry, going all the way back to how electrons and protons fit together to form elements, which fit together to form compounds and molecules, is all built on this same pattern. And to make that possible is the word Shem. And to make it so that human mind can think about it and calculate it is Bet Resh. Bet Resh Resh. And to say, if you go along with it, according to what he built, you get blessed. And if you counter it, you're going to get cursed to the point of wailing and gnashing of teeth, which means burn in hell forever or get consumed forever and become ash, depending on what you believe about that. But you won't be in heaven or life on earth with him where he dwells for eternity, which was built into the system. That can be read in the first line of Genesis. Get into the Mishkan pattern in detail. For the next hour, we can do that.